The shootout ace for the Minnesota Wild had a pretty darn good season as steady Freddy Gaudreau got himself a big contract extension as well. We recap the 2022-2023 season for Freddy Gaudreau today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked On Wild, we are glad you're here and hope that you'll stick with us through the rest of the offseason into next year as well. If you're one of the everydayers that tunes in every single day of the week, we are glad to have you back. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You can go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we recap Freddy Gaudreau's 2022-2023 season. We'll hand out some letter grades, and we'll look at where Gaudreau slots into the lineup going forward after his contract extension during the season. Steady Freddy, the shootout ace for the Minnesota Wild, had just another solid season for the Wild that saw him set a career high in goals and, for the most part, carry over what he was able to do last year in his first real full opportunity in the NHL. He took that and ran with it and continued to do those same steady things Freddy Gaudreau is known for on both offense and defense. But we did, I think, learn an important lesson about what Gaudreau brings to the game as he bounced around in the lineup, played on the first line, played on the second line. I think we have found out that Gaudreau's comfortable spot, his most likely spot in the lineup, is as the third center. And if he is put in that situation, he can be a pretty capable third center for this team going forward. Statistically, Gaudreau with a career high in goals this season in 19. He played a career high in games in 82, besting last year's mark. He ended the season with 38 points, which was 6 fewer than last year, although the struggles that the Wild had in 5-on-5 scoring early on in the season, pretty noted. For Gaudreau, his plus-minus was plus 10, so right around where he was last year. Just 10 penalty minutes for Gaudreau on the season, so a very disciplined member of this Wild squad. 12 of his goals were even strength. He had 7 goals on special teams, 3 on the power play, 4 shorthanded, and had 3 game-winning goals as well. A couple of 1 assist on the power play as well. Shot 13.8%, which was a career high in a career high shots of 138. So he actually scored every 10 shots, which is not bad at all. His time on ice, right around what he was at last year, 16 minutes, 3 seconds this year compared to 16-19 last year. Faceoff percentage slightly below 50%, but a career high in faceoffs taken. He won 500 faceoffs, lost 515. So real slim difference between being above 50% and under. Had 52 blocks, which was a career high, 42 hits, which was just off of last year's career high pace. He had 42 takeaways and just 21 giveaways on the season. So Gaudreau continuing to make the most out of the opportunity that he has had with the Wild over the last couple of seasons. And I don't think Gaudreau is somebody that hurts you in a pinch in particular situations. I just think if you're looking for a long-term fit for him, third-line center is definitely the spot to go. Looking at some of Gaudreau's other numbers ranked amongst the rest of the Minnesota Wild forwards, his 19 goals ranked 5th on the team. His goals against per 60 of 2.08 ranked 6th. Goals for per 60 of 2.20, ranked 8th. And again, struggles on this team with scoring definitely played a role in those situations. Expected goals against per 60 was 2.54, which ranked 9th. Expected goals for per 60 of 2.29, ranked 10th among Wild forwards. Played 93 minutes, 50 seconds on the power play, which ranked 5th amongst Wild forwards. He had 4 points, which was 6th. 172 minutes and 14 seconds on the penalty kill, which was 1st amongst Wild forwards. And a penalty kill goals against per 60 of 7.32, which ranked 10th amongst the Wild forwards, but just solid in a lot of different areas. 138 shots, ranked 6th, and you're not going to have Gaudreau be one of your top 5 shooters, so anywhere in that 6 to 10 range, I think is fine. Second amongst Wild forwards with blocks with 52. His hits were 12th, and face-off percentage 7th amongst Wild forwards. And just, again, not a lot of penalties really at all for Gaudreau this season. Now, as Brett Marshall alludes to in his player cards, none of Freddie's numbers are particularly great, but none of them are particularly bad either. Set a career high in goals with 19 and found his home playing big minutes on the penalty kill. He was also one of the team's better face-off guys, at least among those who regularly took them. He was overcast as a top 6 forward for a good chunk of the season, but really came on strong in the second half after settling into his ideal role on the third line. Signed a 5-year extension and will be a player the Wild are going to lean into to fill in wherever he's needed. That's the versatility portion, because we've seen Gaudreau play with Kaprizov. We've seen him play on that second line. We saw him play on that second line with Matt Boldy when Joel Eriksson-Ek was out. And in a small sample size, not going to hurt you. So I think Gaudreau gives a lot of versatility. Of course, in the regular season, he's pretty darn good at the shootout, which helps accumulate points. Beyond that, doesn't really mean all that much. It's fun, though. But all in all, just very consistent for Gaudreau. He's not somebody that's going to hurt you by going to the box a billion times throughout the course of the game, throughout the course of the season. And his scoring has trended in an upward trajectory over the last couple of seasons as well. So all told, a pretty standard Freddy Gaudreau season for the Wild third-line center here this year. Now, we will hand out some letter grades for Gaudreau's performance, as well as take a look at what the expectations are for Freddie G as we move through the rest of into next year and going into his contract extension beyond that, as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Are you tired of feeling restricted in your shorts? Want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time? Look no further than Bird Dogs, the ultimate solution for the modern man. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are specifically designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Say goodbye to baggy, shapeless shorts and hello to the confidence of a tailored fit. But here's the secret. Bird Dog shorts do exactly the same thing all those other big name brands do, but they fit way better. No more compromising on comfort or style. They've revolutionized shorts by inventing cloud knit fabric, a magical blend that looks just like khaki but stretches, allowing you to move freely while maintaining a slim and stylish appearance. And that's not all. When you order from birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, you'll receive a free Yeti-style tumbler as their gift to you. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We can promise you that. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will be taking a look at how Jordan Greenway did after the trade to Buffalo and why that just continues to be even though we haven't made a selection with the picks yet, why that just was a massive win for Bill Guerin in making that deal before the trade deadline. That's coming up on tomorrow's show. So tune in and enjoy. Make sure you subscribe to Locked on Wild wherever you listen to your podcasts. Letter grade time for steady Freddy Gaudreau. Let's start on offense for Gaudreau. And as we noted, career high in goals, just off a 20-goal pace, which for a third-line center is not bad at all. Some of the other numbers took a slight dip for Gaudreau in 2022-2023. And so factoring in the career high in goals, factoring in the lack of penalties that Gaudreau contributes on the ice, the faceoff percentage slightly below 50%, which is something that you can live with. Maybe want to gradually start to push that up above 50%, but with as many faceoffs as Gaudreau took by playing in every game this year, that's not a bad range to be in. We're going to go for Gaudreau with we'll go with a B for offense for Gaudreau. He's not somebody that is going to be a driver of play, but on a team that had so many guys that were not able to live up to their career high seasons, Ryan Hartman, Marcus Foligno, the Wild needed somebody to step in and help offset some of that lack of production. And at the end of the day, it is only a 5-goal bump from last year to this year, but it's also a 5-goal bump from last year to this year. And so for Gaudreau, he is showing that he can be between a 15 and a 20-goal scorer throughout the course of a full season. And so a guy that can be a complementary component to your offense and somebody that is able to make some plays while also being able to help you out in other ways as well. So we're going B for offense. In terms of the defense, Gaudreau is one of those more gritty kind of sandpapery type of centers that and players on the ice, is that his forte is going to lean more to the defensive side of the puck than it is going to be leaning to the offensive side. So I think I'm going to go with a B here as well. And you look at some of the numbers that Gaudreau was able to put up based off of who the line mates for him were, which was a carousel of changing players. He had Marcus Foligno as a line mate for a time. He had Brandon Duhaime for a handful of games here or there. You had Oscar Sundqvist. You had Gustav Nyquist. A lot of different parts that were rotating in and out on that line. And still Gaudreau's metrics defensively were still in pretty good shape. 2.08 goals against per 60 is a really good number. The expected goals for is not great, but then you look at what was actually scored, and that number is pretty good in and of itself. So we're going to go with a B on defense for Gaudreau. In terms of penalty kill numbers, Gaudreau has become a pretty heavily relied upon portion of at least the penalty kill for the Minnesota Wild. Now, power play wise, he's not going to be one of your top options, and somebody that probably, if you had more of a full component of power play players, that you would look to not have him on those units. You would think that you would be able to have a couple of centers that were higher up in the pecking order, to where then you don't need Gaudreau to be part of that power play unit. And so factoring in his contributions on the penalty kill, I'm going to go with a B- for special teams. The weight is higher for the PK, but part of that power play unit, that second one, that just did not look particularly great at points throughout the season, and he did play a fair amount there. So we're gonna deduct a little bit for special teams for Gaudreau in the power play category. Penalty kill pretty solid for Freddie throughout the course of the season. Postseason, Gaudreau's numbers for the Stanley Cup playoffs against the Dallas Stars. He had 3 goals in the series against the Dallas Stars and had a couple of penalties as well. 2 even strength, 1 power play goal, and face-off percentage of around 44%, which isn't super great for the postseason. And let's factor in as well that Gaudreau was thrust into that 2C when Joel Eriksson Ek was injured and did not really play in the postseason. And so for the postseason for Gaudreau, I think we're going to go with a C-, D+ for Freddie for the postseason. Again, the fact that he was actually able to score some goals would probably lead me to move him more towards the C-, and also factoring in that he is not going to ever be one of your primary focal points on the offensive side. So I think I will bump it up slightly to a C- for the postseason for Freddy Gaudreau. All told, for what Freddy Gaudreau is and what he was able to do, I'm going to end up giving him a B for the season for his contributions all throughout the lineup. Just really a solid player for this Wild team, which is why his contract extension looks pretty darn good, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. But all told, when the Wild finally were able to settle him into the spot in the lineup he should be, is when he just really started to give you a solid baseline performance. And, sometimes you'll send that wave higher in terms of performance, and you'll have some of those peaks in the performance wave. You do occasionally have a valley or two here, but they just seem like they're way more spread out with Gaudreau than with some of the other players on this team. So for Gaudreau, going with a B for the letter grades. Now let's talk about that contract that Gaudreau signed during the season. In fact, during a game in which he scored 2 goals against the Nashville Predators. We'll talk about the Gaudreau extension and where that puts him amongst the rest of the Minnesota Wild key players. That will be coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel offers you great promotions every single day that may line up with some of the bets that you would make anyway. It's the most safe and secure app there is, and best of all, when you win on FanDuel, you get paid instantly. There is simply no better place to bet all of the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. And if you head to FanDuel.com/lockedon, you'll get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you can tune in tomorrow as we talk about the Jordan Greenway trade. Take a look at how he did with Buffalo after the trade. Spoiler alert, not great. So we'll talk about that, and we'll bring it back to what Bill Guerin was able to get for Jordan Greenway and how it impacts this offseason, all coming up on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild. So Freddy Gaudreau, as we mentioned, signed an extension during the season. In fact, it was during the game against the Nashville Predators in which he scored 2 goals. And so he is locked in through the 2027-2028 season at $2.1 million per season. And so for Gaudreau, at age 30, you'll get him to his age 35 season. And after that, you're probably Well, we'll see. You're probably not going to sign Gaudreau beyond that, I wouldn't think. But the Wild have done a good job of locking in at a relatively cheap cost their middle two centers. Joel Eriksson Ek, always going to be that 2C or that middle six center, but plays the role of a 2C, I think, very well. And the Wild have, I think, done a good job of understanding that Eriksson Ek is going to be his best role is as a 2C for this team that has a defensive focus, but can also really help you offensively as well by being that net front presence guy. So the Wild have him as the 2C. You put Gaudreau in as the 3C, and you've got your middle six centers taken care of over the next few seasons. Now, that coincides with what has been one of the bigger issues for the Minnesota Wild, not only over the last couple of years, but also throughout the course of their history as a franchise. Haven't been able to find that 1C because Ryan Hartman's playing that role right now, but ideally, it's not a role that he necessarily is suited for. There's been a lot of comments in previous episodes in which it's been pointed out that Hartman could probably play a role similar to what Marcus Foligno is doing right now, just not necessarily with that same size. Gritty, sandpaper kind of player that can be physical and can give you some defensive presence, and is a guy right now that is playing that top spot while the Wild try to find an answer more long term in that role. And so you find somebody in that role to slide into that top spot, and all of a sudden you've got your top center, whoever that may be. You've got Joel Eriksson Ek as the 2C. You've got Freddy Gaudreau as the 3C. And all of a sudden the dominoes start to slot together to where you feel a little bit better about your center depth than you previously did, because we saw what happens in the postseason. You take away Joel Eriksson Ek, you deduct him from the equation, and you're rolling with Hartman. You've got Gaudreau, and you've got Sam Steele, and then your fourth line center as well. And that was not a good recipe for success. Not to say those guys aren't good players, but elevated into roles that extend beyond their skill set is asking for a problem. And so as the Wild continue to navigate that 1C conundrum, you've got a 2 and a 3C that are pretty good in their own right, and offer some versatility. But you combine the amount of money that you've spent on those two guys at $7.35 million per season, and you get a pretty good value there considering what both of them do, what they are asked to do. And it just is another instance in which Bill Guerin makes a pretty shrewd signing to just check a box off the list for this team going forward. And is 5 years for a guy who is 30 a little rich? Yeah, probably, but that $2.1 million price point is something that just is never going to really hurt you. Because let's say Gaudreau continues to show some growth and improvement here, and can end up being a perennial 20-goal guy that is playing that third center spot. That's a pretty solid decision by Bill Guerin to lock that up long term. So you've got a couple of the centers in the equation taken care of. You're still in pursuit of that 1C, and so locking in 2C and 3C so that they're here while you're trying to figure out the other portion of that puzzle. Not a bad decision. It's just we know what those two guys are, and the team is in good shape until they try to extend them beyond where they are capable of producing. So it's a good deal. I like the deal for Gaudreau. I think it's a solid signing by Bill Guerin that is going to help this team over the next few seasons for sure. And it just gives them another veteran guy that you can put into the lineup at a relatively cheap cost as well. Now, what are the expectations for Gaudreau heading into next season? Well, it's just to do more of the same. Just be a guy that plays every night, chips in a goal here or there, is not somebody that's going to hurt you in the penalty box. The one area I would say that could use a little improvement is in the face-off circle, but for as much as Gaudreau does, as many different roles as he can fill, it's just more of what we've come to expect from Gaudreau after he was with Bill Guerin in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh didn't really know what they had, and so they also were not able to they weren't able to really give him the type of money at the time that the Minnesota Wild did. So there are a lot of different factors at play that led to Gaudreau coming here, and it has been a solid addition to this Minnesota Wild team over the last couple of seasons, to say the least. So more from Gaudreau, we hope, as his deal kicks in next season, and it'll be interesting to see what he does for an encore after setting a career high in goals. We'll see what he is able to do to try to one-up that come 2023, 2024. And that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you to everyone for tuning in each and every day of the week. If this is your first time tuning into Locked On Wild, we are glad to have you along and hope that you enjoyed listening today and that you'll stick with us through the rest of the offseason into next season as well. If you are an everydayer that tunes in each and every day of the week, we're glad to have you back. Either category, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the week. We've got some exciting guests coming up here over the next couple of weeks as well. So stay tuned as we guide you through the rest of the off season with new content every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.